My name's Lisa, I'm 32, and I'm a Metis and my husband's First Nations. At 15, I became pregnant for the first time. I never thought that I would become pregnant out of wedlock, and I always thought that if I ever became pregnant, I would just be a mother. Abortion was never even a thought that would cross my mind. I talked to my parents about it, and they told me if I was to keep the baby, I could no longer live with them. So being 15, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I had nowhere else to go. I remember my dad taking me. I believe I was about 12 or 13 weeks along when it was done, and I didn't really think that there was any baby anyway. It was just tissue, which is what I was told. When I was 16, I became pregnant for the second time, and by this time I was living on my own. I told my mom and dad that I would have the baby, I was going to keep the baby, and they were okay with it. But this time the pressure came from my boyfriend's family and him to have an abortion. He kept telling me that he didn't want to be part of a baby's life, he didn't want to be a father, but I was prepared to do it on my own until his sisters and his mom got on the phone with me and convinced me that if I kept the baby, I was being selfish and I was going to ruin his life. This time I was about 16 weeks along, so it had to be a longer procedure. I remember one doctor inserting something to make me dilate, and that doctor casually saying, abortion isn't birth control. The third abortion that I had, I was 18, and by this time I was really suicidal. So when I became pregnant, I was at the point that I didn't even want to bring a baby into the world, and this time it was completely my decision. And I was 22 weeks. It was a 2-day procedure. They inserted the seaweed into me, and at that time the doctor told me, you probably won't be able to have kids because you've had 3 abortions. I went back to the apartment. All the cramping and the bleeding began and lasted overnight. And the next morning I remember going in, and one of the nurses that gave me the IV had a daughter born the same day in the same hospital as me, and she felt very compassionate. During the actual procedure, for some reason this time I wasn't out, I was still awake, and I knew because of how far along I was that there was some sort of baby. And I remember asking the doctor if he could tell what sex it was and if he could see the face. I didn't get any answers from anybody. They finished it up and sent me into the recovery room where I recovered for an hour. And I pretty much buried it and forgot about it until I had my babies with my husband. And it was then that I saw them on ultrasound and felt them moving and kicking. And it was then that I knew that it wasn't just tissue. With my son, I felt him kicking and actually saw him kicking at 16 weeks, which was 6 weeks earlier than the last abortion that I had. That was hard to swallow. All I remember is being told that it's tissue and that it was safe and common. Actually, the first time that my husband and I got pregnant, I had a miscarriage. I had a lot of trouble carrying my daughter. Almost lost her once and was on bed rest. And then delivering her, the placenta wouldn't come out. So they tried to tug out the placenta by the umbilical cord, which pulled off of the placenta. And I didn't stop bleeding for months. and months after she was born. When I became pregnant with my son, the doctor explained to me that because of all of the abortions and the D&Cs with the miscarriage, the density of your uterine walls lessens, and the baby has a harder time, which is a side effect of abortion that I was never told. I was also told years later that I had endometriosis, which is a side effect of abortion. And I'm now just finding out that I have another thing, which is only cured by a hysterectomy, which is another side effect of abortion. I believe that it doesn't matter what culture you come from or what background you have, you know that life is life. And if you're a young girl choosing to be naive to that, eventually it'll catch up to you. So the reason I'm walking is for all of the girls that find themselves in the situation that I found myself in. For me, there was nobody that encouraged me to keep a baby at any point. I'm walking for the women like myself that thought it was okay and really thought that it was just tissue, only to later find out that it wasn't. To ask for forgiveness for our nation, for the aborted babies. And I'm walking for our government to stand up and to have courage to do what's right, whether it's just passing a small legislation, regulations, whatever it might look like. Those are the reasons I'm walking.